Hi, welcome to the Hunter Local Land Services Livestock Forum 2020. My name is Albert Milne and I work in the Ag Production team. I'm based in Taree and my area covers Gloucester, the Manning, Great Lakes and Koroua. I will be moderating the session today, so I hope everything works out okay. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to elders past, present and future. We also recognise the unique, diverse and enduring cultures of First Nations people in New South Wales. We are streaming live to you on our Facebook and YouTube platforms. I would encourage everybody on those platforms today to communicate, participate in our forum. Give us a good thumbs up or make a comment. We've got our speakers today, so it'd be great if you could ask questions during their presentation and we'll ask them at the end of their presentation. This is session 2 of our forum this year, and if you've missed out on the first session or won't be around for the incoming sessions, the next 2, then you can catch up on these sessions because all of our sessions are being recorded and will be on our Hunter Local Land Services webpage. If our session here today stalls, don't panic. We are working here to reconnect. Our internet might have dropped out for a little while, a couple of seconds. Just hang on and it should restart for you automatically. So let's get cracking. We've got 2 great speakers here today. We've got Matthew Milne from the Rural Advisory Mental Health Program, RAMHP, and we've got Graham Creed, who is the ABC weatherman. Both guys are here today in our room, so they're live as well. So once again, put to us those questions and put them on the spot and see if they can answer your interests. Firstly, we're kicking off with Matthew. Matthew, to give you a bit of background, is a registered psychologist and has worked in many rural areas over the past 6 years, providing on-farm counselling across the New England and Northwest region for farmers and families doing it tough during the recent drought. Matthew is now based in the Hunter Valley. His topic for this session is minimising the stress. Oh, who likes the stress? Minimising the stress of decision making. Matthew, farmers have been under a lot of stress for a long time now. I suppose that's no news to you. We've been through the longest drought in recorded history, and the ongoing effects of drought now, making decisions with a clear head must be hard at the moment. This is certainly a timely topic. And so, Matthew, how can we best manage that stress?
Thanks, Albert. So farming can be pretty stressful, but it doesn't have to be when it comes to making decisions. And so today, my presentation is about minimising the stress of decision making. As Albert mentioned, my name is Matthew Milne. I work for the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program based here in the Hunter. There's 4 other coordinators that are in our region, and altogether there's 20 of us that cover New South Wales. We work in regional and rural areas to provide mental health training, information and support when necessary, and I've been asked to speak at the Hunter Livestock Forum this year. So I'm going to run you through the outline of our presentation today. First of all, I'm going to be talking about stress, how stress affects the body. Then I'll move on to how stress impacts decision making. We're then going to talk about tips for decision making under stress, and then also what happens when stress becomes too much. How do we manage that and how do we deal with it? As mentioned, that we've got a bit of a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, so stick around. If you think of anything that you want to ask as I'm going along, be sure to jot it down on a piece of paper or type it in, and we'll get to those questions towards the end. Thank you. So let's start by talking about stress. What is stress? We've all used that word, we've heard it before, we understand it in some way, but have we ever really stopped to think about what stress actually is? If we had to define it, stress is the physical and emotional response to having demands made upon us. Now you'll see that both words, physical and emotional, are there. That's because stress affects both the body and our mental state. Stress is universal and it's something that we all have to deal with in varying degrees on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes stress can build. It's often a response to an event or a situation that's causing us some sort of worry or anxiety, and it impacts how we're thinking and feeling. Some stress we choose to take on. This is considered to be a good type of stress, and that could be like moving house, starting a new job, or going on a holiday. Stress is something that we've normally agreed to and entered into, so it's dealt with a lot more efficiently and effectively than stress that is something that we don't choose or that we have no choice about. Stresses that we have no choice about tend to have a bigger impact on our life and also have the potential to cause a lot more impairment and a greater impact and lasting longer. So when stress is dealt with efficiently and when we manage it effectively, it can be a great learning experience and a great opportunity to build self-regulation and resilience. And when we pair that with decision making, we can actually become better at making decisions and managing stress. So down the track in the future, the stress that we experience is less and our decision making ability becomes more effective. We'll talk about stress and the body. Through evolution, we developed a little man in our brain, and he's constantly searching for threats in our environment. His job is to keep us safe and protect us. So when he notices a threat or danger, his job is to hit a nice big red button in front of him and let us know that something isn't right. When he hits that button, our body jumps into action. In the business, we call this the acute stress response. We better know it as the fight or flight response. This is often associated with a release of adrenaline and hormones in our body, and it prepares our body for an attack. This physiological reaction comes with a number of changes in our body. Some of those things include our pupils dilating so we can see better and improve our vision. Our heart rate and breathing rate can increase to ensure that we have more blood and oxygen moving around our body. And digestion can stop and blood can be redirected to our brain and our muscles. And sometimes this is associated with a throbbing or a tingling sensation in our muscles that we all probably understand and have felt from some time to time when we've been stressed or worried. Now, while the fight or flight response might have kept us safe when we were cavemen being chased by saber-toothed tigers, in a world that's relatively safe from physical threats these days, this little man can pretty quickly disrupt our life when he becomes accustomed to searching for danger and he starts to see it in non-physical threats. When a non-physical threat is present, like increasing debt or the absence of rain or declining stock health becomes the thing causing us stress, the little man, he knows that that's something that we should be concerned about. So he's hitting that red button, he's trying to let us know that something isn't right and our body's responding. But we can't run away from debt or fight the lack of rain. So this little man, while he's trying his very best to help us out, it makes no difference to him. He's going to be letting us know that something's not right, but it really isn't doing things for us. Our body is remaining on high alert constantly. It's being flooded with adrenaline and hormones and all those responses that come along with it. So why do we still have this little man? You might be thinking that, we probably don't need him anymore given that we have no threats. But think of a situation where you go to cross the road and you look left and right and you step out and then all of a sudden a car appears out of nowhere. You were sure that you didn't see it before. Well, that little man, his job is to hit that red button. Our body responds, we jump out of the way and the car flies past. He's kept us safe. Or we might be walking home one night in the dark and a shady character comes up behind us and tries to steal our wallet or our phone. That little man, he knows that's a dangerous situation. He hits the red button, our body becomes charged up and we can all of a sudden fight our attacker or run away from it. That's a situation where the little man's quite useful for us and probably a good reason why we don't want to get rid of him just yet. But we do need to become better at retraining the little man to find danger in different situations. So, as I mentioned, the level of alert that we operate on when we're stressed or anxious is unsustainable to operate in the long term. And if we're unable to get back to rest or a state of relaxation, that level can be quite detrimental to our body, our physical health and our overall well-being, and our health is going to suffer. I've got a table here that outlines the three main categories of ways that stress impacts our body. So first of all, physical. Our sleep is going to be impacted with stress, and I'm sure this is something that we've all experienced from time to time. We can either sleep too much or not enough. If we're sleeping too much, it might be that we're trying to avoid the stress and we don't feel stress when we're asleep, so we can snooze and nap a lot. Or that stress might actually just prevent us from being able to get to sleep at all. That's going to leave us feeling in a constant state of exhaustion, and from that we can develop aches, pains and headaches and general illnesses as our body starts letting us know that something's not right. We might start to withdraw from others. That stress that we're experiencing is consuming too much of our thinking time, and we don't feel like we've got the opportunity for social time. And we might be able to see alcohol use. Now that's related with self-medication, and it's something that I'll talk a little bit about later on in this presentation. When all these things add up, it leaves us with an increased chance of sickness and general illness or well-being. I'll keep moving on. Our emotional impact on the body is that we will experience some general unhappiness. We might feel constantly overwhelmed. We can become irritable, angry or moody. We can experience feelings of isolation or loneliness, and our relationships can be impacted by that stress. Now that's just not relationships with our significant other. It could be our relationship with our friends or our family, our workplace, or even the relationship with ourselves. This all leaves us with an increased chance of developing a mental illness down the track. And mentally, these things are going to be much more noticeable when it comes to stress. Is going to induce some memory problems. It's going to leave us with a brain fog and difficulty concentrating. We're going to have trouble with focus and drive. And we're also going to experience poor judgment, logical reasoning and decision-making ability is going to really suffer from a lot of stress. And we're going to start to find ourselves in a place where we start to see only the negative. So knowing how the body is affected by the fight or flight response, it's pretty easy to know that our decision-making ability is severely impacted when it comes to thinking through a choice and making a decision based on that. Now, we make decisions every day, so it's not something that's completely foreign to us, but it's irresponsible for us to compare deciding whether we have tea or coffee with breakfast to whether we take another $50,000 loan out to continue feeding stock through a drought. When the need to make a large decision occurs, stress builds. And as a result, our acute stress response is triggered, or our fight or flight response. And the little man, he does his job by hitting the button and our body responds. He's trying to let us know that we need to do something, and that's going to increase our stress. But since we aren't able to fight it or run away from it, we probably take the first wrong step in the decision-making process. We try and get away from it, or we try to avoid it. You know, we say things to ourselves like, I'll worry about that tomorrow. How many times have we heard ourselves say that? For me, probably more times than I care to mention, because I too suffer from stress and worry about certain things. And just like all humans, we don't like feeling that discomfort, so we try and get away from it. But as we procrastinate and we avoid, as it's a natural process, we don't want to be feeling that discomfort, so we find ways to get away from it. We might throw ourselves into another project or tell ourselves that we're too busy to worry about that decision right at the moment. But we can only put off a decision for so long. Eventually, the stress is going to build to a point that we can't cope anymore. We won't be able to ignore it. So we might decide to do something about it. We'll start weighing up our options. And that's finally a step in the right direction. But since we're probably not firing on all cylinders, the process of weighing up our options might not be the most efficient. It's normal and healthy to analyse different options or choices when it comes to making a decision. And we each have our own threshold that we're willing to accept when we've analysed enough of our options to pull the trigger on making a decision, even if we can't be certain about what the outcome might be. But when stress is high or there's a lot on the line, the decision-making threshold that we set for ourselves can be too high. We won't want to finalise a decision until we're 100% we know what the right decision is, or we know what the outcome will be. And when that occurs, the decision-making process becomes endless, and we call that paralysis by analysis. And then we're stuck. And when we realise we're stuck and that we haven't made a decision and that time's running out, we probably make another poor choice, and that is to go back to avoiding the decision. Now that begins the cycle again, and we haven't gotten anywhere. We've caused ourselves a lot of stress for no benefit. So once we realise that we're stuck in that decision-making process, that too can increase our anxiety. We know that we need to make a decision, and we know that time's running out, so why can't we choose? This pressure that we put on ourselves creates a negative feedback cycle where the more that we think about the stress that we're experiencing, the more our anxiety goes up, and the more we know that we need to make that decision, which creates further anxiety, and then we are constantly aware of our stress and that cycle, and our anxiety and worry is just at an all-time high. And we want to avoid that, so we continue to put off the decision. Often the stress makes decision making harder by tricking us into believing that there's a right choice or a wrong choice, or a good and a bad one. If you're feeling really stuck between two decisions, it's very likely that neither decision will be the wrong one. Once you've made that decision or that choice, whichever one that might be, you'll start to organise the environment around you, including your behaviours and smaller choices that you make around that bigger decision. And you'll effectively be working towards a predetermined outcome and the other options that were part of the initial decision-making process that weren't selected are going to have minimal impact on the current direction that you're heading. Stress will also attempt to influence our decisions by presenting us with all possible outcomes, particularly the negative ones. And when we focus on decision making, we often try to avoid the outcome that we don't want rather than working towards something that we do want. So when we see a large number of what we might consider to be bad decisions or undesirable options, we're going to attempt to keep searching for the right option, which delays our choice, which again leaves us in that paralysis by analysis phase. If we stay stuck for too long, sometimes the decision will be made for us. And often this isn't in a good way. For example, the RSPCA or a stock welfare board might become involved, or we could simply run out of money and water and be forced to sell. These situations can add to our stress and negatively impact our mental health and make us question our ability to even make decisions in the first place. We certainly don't want to end up in a position like this. We can also find ourselves stuck in a number of common thinking traps which prevent our ability to think logically and rationally and make a decision. So we might find ourselves trapped in the all or nothing thought, and that's sometimes referred to as black or white thinking. We might say to ourselves, you know, if I don't make the right decision, I've completely failed. Or either I do it right or not at all. If we try to stay in either this black or white zone, we really miss finding the grey area in the middle, which is often the way forward. We might find ourselves mentally filtering, where we only pay attention to certain types of evidence. We might find ourselves reflecting on all of our poor past decisions or take responsibility for something that wasn't completely our fault. So decision making doesn't have to be a daunting process. With some guidance and some help, we can actually become quite practiced at making decisions, which makes it a skill for life. When it comes to big decisions, it's important to have a strategy, what information you need, and then space for your options. This is going to be a good place to start when it comes to making a decision. It helps you consider the information that you can get from experts And it also, the bit that I've cut off down the bottom there that I couldn't fit on the slide, gives you an opportunity for self-reflection to make it a learning experience. Decision making will get easier the more that we do it. I promise you that. By purposefully confronting the stress that we experience from our decisions, it will actually retrain the little man in our brain and will decrease our anxiety in the long term. The more times that you make a decision and take action in different situations, the easier and easier it'll become, and the less and less stress will be associated with decision making. Also, by making decisions more frequently, there's a chance that we can prevent ourselves from having to make a bigger decision down the track. We also need to make sure that each decision-making process is a learning experience. We need to get feedback on the decisions that we made. Either that's by self-reflection, we could talk to some of the experts that we asked for help, or we could even just have a yarn with one of our neighbours or some people downtown. We need to make sure that we look at the decision that we made and how it went for us. We also need to remember to view every decision and know that it was made in isolation. One decision, one choice, one option was taken at one particular point in time. If a decision hadn't worked out for you in the past, it doesn't mean that the decisions that you make now are going to be overly impacted by that one. We also need to back ourselves knowing that the decision that we took or made was based on the best information that we had possible. Now, we can help ourselves out by getting information from those people who can help us fill in the gaps of our knowledge. Remember, we can't be expected to know everything. And even if upon reflection a decision that we made proved to have been poor, don't fall into the trap of believing that that makes us terrible at making decisions. Sometimes things are simply out of our control, or there was just a factor that we couldn't predict. As long as we continue to work towards an outcome once a decision has been made, we're going to be doing everything that we can to ensure the best possible outcome for that decision. So let's talk about what happens when stress becomes distress. Now, big decisions can cause big stress, and recognising when we're overwhelmed and getting help can go a long way to helping prevent a more long-term mental health problem from developing. As I mentioned at the beginning, being in a constant state of alert or stress can be quite detrimental to our body and mind. So we need to make sure that we've got skills to manage our stress when it comes knocking. So when we know that we're overwhelmed, we might start to see some little telltale signs that I've outlined here. So we might start to see some changes in ourselves, or other people for that matter, where stress is becoming too much. Those people or ourselves, we might become teary or overly emotional or angry at times when we're generally pretty easygoing people. We might have trouble sleeping. I've mentioned this before, we can be either sleeping too much or not enough. We might start to feel like larger symptoms of anxiety or depression are starting to creep in. We might also feel alone or trapped or isolated, and our body might feel like it's breaking down. And that's it just trying to tell us that something's wrong and we need to do something about it. When stress becomes long-term, the intensity and the duration that we experience, that impact and these feelings can increase to a point where we can't cope anymore. I liken it to carrying around a bucket where all of our stress goes into it from the day. The stress can come in from different sources. It could be financial, work, emotional, family stress, and all these things fill up the bucket. If we don't have a way to go home each day and tip out our bucket a little bit, eventually that bucket fills up to the point that it starts overflowing. And that's when we become overwhelmed and we can't cope anymore. And all of a sudden we find ourselves stressed out with no way to empty our stress bucket. Now, we can manage stress on our own. And we've already covered one of the biggest tips to managing stress when it comes to making decisions. And that is actually making a decision. If we can make a decision before the stress gets too high, we've done ourselves a huge favour. Working on sleep is probably the next most important thing. If we aren't rested, we aren't firing on all cylinders. And poor sleep is one of the biggest contributors to ongoing mental illness and such a risk factor in developing a mental illness that it makes it a priority to address when it comes to making sure we're okay. There's a few things that we can do to improve sleep. The first thing is to make sure that our bedroom and our bed is set up for good sleep. That means making sure our room is dark, quiet, our bed is comfortable, and our room's the right temperature. It also pays to have a nice bedtime routine. That could be taking some time after dinner to wind down and watch some TV, having a shower, brushing your teeth, and jumping into bed with a good book. Now, I said book there and not our devices because we've come to know that the light that comes off our devices can actually prevent our brain from producing the hormone melatonin, which helps us get to sleep. It's best to try and avoid using our devices for an hour or two before we get into bed to make sure that we're in our best possible place for good sleep. The other thing that we can do is go easy on the grog. I mentioned before that alcohol is a risk factor for mental health and stress, and often some people try to use alcohol as a way to get to sleep. Now, alcohol can make us feel relaxed and sleepy, and some people choose to use that as a way to help get better sleep. But really what they're doing is a disservice to themselves because alcohol impacts our ability to have quality sleep. And we actually wake up the next day feeling much worse for wear, and that starts the cycle of feeling sleepy and tired through the day. We then go to sleep in the night. We're not having good sleep if we're consuming alcohol before sleep. We don't want alcohol to become something that we rely on to get to sleep. There's plenty of things that we can do in the meantime, and a doctor can help out with sleep if we need a little bit of extra help. The next thing that we can do is relax, and that's probably easier said than done. This is different for everyone. Some of us have hobbies, some of us listen to music, some of us exercise, some meditate. Whatever the thing is that helps us calm down, we need to do more of it. And if you're sitting there wondering what your thing is or thinking that you don't have a thing, that's great. This is a perfect opportunity for you to try things out, learn a new skill, do something that you've never done before, and find your thing. Now, if you're not quite sure what it is, you can jump online and start having a look for hobbies or interests. You can also talk to your family and friends or some mates. They might have a few things that they do that help them relax and wind down, and you might be able to do those things as well. That has the added benefit of creating a social component to it. Finally, we might need to reach out for help if things are becoming too much, and that is okay. We don't have to suffer in silence. There are plenty of people out there who can help us get back on the right track. They might be a friend or a family member that you feel comfortable talking to. It might be one of those experts that we mentioned earlier who can help kickstart the decision-making process and help us take action, or it might be a GP or a mental health professional. Getting help shouldn't be a scary process. A GP or a mental health professional is going to provide a safe place where you can talk openly and honestly about what's going on, and you can work together to form a plan to get back on your feet. There's also plenty of online or telephone services that you can access from the privacy of your own home, the shed, or out on the tractor. Anyone that you talk to won't judge you about what's going on. They're going to work side by side with you to help you get back to normal. You're going to be in the driver's seat the whole time making decisions as well. Here's a table of local options and reliable resources that you can access if you need a hand. You don't have to memorise this. This information is included on a lot of our resources and is also going to be included in the digital information pack that you get with this forum. The best place to start is always your GP. Hopefully the GP is someone that you know and someone who knows you. Hopefully it's also someone that you've been seeing for a while. You can have a chat to them about what's going on. They can investigate physical options as well as provide avenues to explore emotional or mental options for help. If things aren't too bad for you and you feel like you just need to have a yarn with someone to mull a few things over, you can contact the Farmgate Support Program. It might be for you. A peer worker, who's someone from the land who's been trained in mental health, or a counsellor can come out to your house or your workplace or meet you in a park or downtown and just have a chat with you. You can also contact them on the phone. These people can provide reassurance and help you go through your options and strategise with you to move forward. This doesn't cost anything, and as you can imagine, it's been a pretty popular service. This service wasn't available in our Hunter region for a while, but thankfully we've just received some funding and we do have a peer worker in our area and they can now be available to you. The next step, if things aren't under control, would be to see a psychologist. You'll need to work with your GP to get a referral to see them, and you'll probably have to pay some sort of gap fee. A psychologist is a specialist in mental health. They're going to listen to you and talk about your troubles. They'll be able to provide specific mental health advice and information. And remember that everything that you talk about with any of these people is confidential. If you're unsure about your options, you've got questions, or you need some more information to get started, you can give me a call. There's my number right there on the screen. Together we can come up with a solution that suits you. We can have a bit of a chat about what's going on. I can provide you with some local options or some strategies, and we can go from there. Now, if you'd prefer to have a go on your own, there's nothing wrong with that either. There's a few telephone and online resources I can chat through, which you can access privately without any cost. The first one is Lifeline. That's a pretty common one. I'm sure we've all heard of that before. The next is the mental health line. Now, this is great if things are getting a little bit more serious or you'd like to start a referral without actually having gone to the doctor. I do need to provide some information though about the mental health line. If you call that number, pop the kettle on and make yourself a cup of tea. It can sometimes be up to an hour before that phone gets answered, and that's because of a huge demand on the service and also a bit of a lack of funding. Now, that service is going through a re-evaluation and refunding period, and hopefully there'll be a lot more opportunity for more people to man those phones where you speak to a trained mental health clinician to get advice. There's also the Beyond Blue line, which can provide telephone counselling. As far as online resources go, I always recommend the Head to Health website straight away. The reason for this is that if you jump on Google and type in mental health information, you can be swamped by the amount of information that you get. It's also really hard to tell what information's reliable and what information's dodgy. This Head to Health website is a government endorsed website where every resource that's recommended has been checked and vetted by a mental health expert to make sure that it's something that's going to be useful or helpful in the long term for you. There's also the Black Dog Institute or the Beyond Blue website to provide printable resources. And there's also our website, our RAMHP website. Now, we are a rural and regional based organisation, and all of our resources that we develop are targeted with those people in mind. You can jump on there, you can type in your postcode to find your nearest coordinator, you can have a chat with them. You can also find printable and downloadable resources online. Now, before I go, when I was preparing this presentation, I came across some interesting bits of information that I thought were relevant to the topic that we're talking about. The University of Southern California has been investigating the differences between men and women when it comes to decision making, and they found that under stress, men took more risks when it came to making a decision, where women tended to be more conservative when there was a lot on the line. Now, this might help us understand the different positions that a husband and wife might take when it comes to making a big decision, and help us realise that maybe a compromise is the best way forward. And an article in the Journal of Agricultural Safety and Health reported a study that linked psychological stress and farm injury. This was called the Ontario Farm Family Health Study, and it found that both male and female farmers were more likely to incur a physical injury of some sort when they were carrying a greater amount of psychological stress. The number one stress that was cited in this study was financial worries, followed by feeling overworked. Now, I hope you, like me, to take this as a bit of a wake-up call. It's now clear that when our head isn't right, the consequences can result in physical injury. Again, I'd encourage you to get in contact with me and give me a call if anything that we've covered today has brought up any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking in this format, or perhaps made you realise that maybe you weren't doing so well. Mental health problems are both common and treatable, and the sooner that you take action, the sooner that you'll be back on top of things. I also can provide free mental health training to groups who'd like to know more about mental health. So if you have a group that might be interested in more about this topic, please get in touch with me and I can help you out. That's all I've got for today. Thank you for tuning into this webinar, and I'll pass it back to Albert.
Thank you, Matthew. That was a really interesting talk. Hopefully that relieved some of the stress out there for producers and landholders around. And I think that those who watched session 1 might be able to link up with Cam's matrix on some of that decision making. I heard Matt's was a key thing he talked about in his topics about making decisions. And Cam had a matrix in session 1 to evaluate that final decision to try to make. So yeah, get back onto our Hunter Local Land Services website and you'll be able to see session 1 recorded on that site. Hopefully you've checked in and posted us some questions for Matt later on in the program. And last recording we had 1,400 people view it. So if your question today might help someone else who watches this recording at a later time. So it would be really great if you could participate. Our next speaker is Graham Creed. I don't know whether Graham needs any introduction. I certainly see him most weeknights after the news telling us about the weather. But to give you a bit of background, you might not know about Graham. Graham has worked in New South Wales for 11 years in Moree, Wagga Wagga, Lord Howe Island as a bomb technical officer. He has also worked in television and radio for 7 years with Ozstar and Foxtel and is currently ABC New South Wales and the ABC News Channel. Graham also has a farm where he's building an enterprise with bees, native seeds, fruits, berries and garlic. So that's a great thing. Graham's also a farmer. I bet you he's watching out for that next front as well. And so he's got a great topic this morning and I think we can all relate to it, and it's called Where's the Rain You Promised? Hey Graham, is that really your topic, mate? Or is that a question that just keeps on ringing in your ears?
Yeah, Albert, thanks for that. It does ring in my ears quite often sometimes, but really today what I'd like to do with you is to share some of the tools that I use to create the forecast that we provide on television and radio right across the state, and actually on 24 News nationally as well. And I think that when you get a little bit of an understanding of what goes into some of these forecasts, some of the information that's available out there, you'll be able to look at the forecasts with slightly different eyes and hopefully more accurate eyes, because quite often when we do look at a forecast and we read it, we take our own interpretation into that, and sometimes it's that interpretation that is a little bit less accurate than what the actual forecast is. So looking at the rainfall to begin with. So rainfall is forecast by computer models. So basically these computer models are looking at the amount of moisture available through the atmosphere, also how much stability or instability is sitting through it as well. And this is what they then decide who's going to see rainfall and how much rainfall is going to be expected from that. And that's how we get our little forecast with our percentage chance of rain and the probable rainfall. So this is basically a model forecast, and it has forecaster, so a human input into it. Now basically this is probably one of the most misread forecasts that the Bureau of Meteorology produce. So there are 3 things that I want you to walk away with on this graphic. That's 0.2 of a millimetre, 50% chance and 25% chance. So down at the bottom, chance of any rain, 100% on this forecast. Now that 100% relates to recording 0.2 of a millimetre of rainfall, because that's all that's recorded to class a day as having recorded rain. So you need to remember that. It's not 100% chance of between 4 and 10 millimetres. Now the other 2 figures that I mentioned were 50% and 25%. So in this example, there's a 50% chance that this location could record 4 millimetres of rain. And the 10 millimetres, there's a 25% chance that you may record 10 millimetres of rain. So most people look at this and think it's a 100% chance of between 4 and 10 millimetres. Well, it's just not the case. So you need to look at these forecasts remembering those key amounts or key figures. So the chance of rainfall is just that you're going to get some drops. The rest of it is a 50% chance, always the figure on the left, just a 25% chance of the higher figure on the right. Now, as well as this, it's also worthwhile looking at some of the reasons or some of the causes of the rainfall that you're going to get. So not only do you need to read the text side of the forecast, but you need to work out or need to look at the potential of whether it's going to fall in showers and thunderstorms, or is it going to be more widespread rain? And this does make a difference because convective showers and thunderstorms are basically formed by updrafts and downdrafts. And where you've got an updraft, that's where you see the cloud forming because it's unstable. But where you get a downdraft, that's a very stable parcel of air. And that's why when you see showers and thunderstorms, there are usually big gaps in between them. And that's why showers and thunderstorms, any rainfall from them is going to be quite patchy. The other feature is that forecast models can't predict exactly where these showers are going to form. That's an impossibility because it really does just depend on the heating during the day. So that's why we can't say that these showers will form at this specific location. The opposite can be said for stratiform clouds, so altostratus in this example. Now basically these clouds are formed by uplift, and that's that you're looking at variations between each of the models. So this product actually combines all that information and gives you the best likelihood of rainfall across a region. And for the first 5 days of this forecast period, it's actually more accurate than any individual forecast model. So you're getting a far more accurate product than looking at just one model or one app. Now the other thing about apps is most apps only use one of the forecast models. So this one is far more accurate than any individual map will be, and that includes the Bureau Meteorology app and also the METI app, which are only using the Bureau's access model. Now the other benefit with this is you get a really good national overview. You can go through it day by day, or you can choose to accumulate 4-day periods. So the first 4 days and then the next 4 days. But not only that, you can bring it down into a state-based view, and you can also take it down into a district view if you wanted to go that low. Now there's also a different range of ways you can look at it. There's daily rainfall total for the nation, the state and the districts. These go out for individual days out to 5 days. There's a daily percentage chance of rainfall. We've got, as I said before, the first 4 days and then the next 4 days, the full 8 days. But there's also an opportunity to go in and look at the percentage chance of 1 millimetre, 5 millimetres, 10 millimetres, 15, 25 and 50. And these give you a pretty good idea of exactly where this rain is expected to fall, what the chances of it are. And often when you see it written in a forecast, it may start out. So it is providing an outlook on the expected climate conditions that will produce a potential of rainfall. Now to start with, we can go to the overview page. So this is really quite a broad overview of what's going on through the atmosphere. Usually when you go into the summary section, it's talking state-based, even multiple states. So at the moment, it's talking about potential of increased rainfall along the east coast, potentially drier conditions over the inland. So it's really quite broad, which is not necessarily localised enough for individual farmers' needs. But what it also does on the Outlook page has climate influences. Now what this will do is break down what are the main climate factors that are influencing the outlook for rainfall and temperature across the nation, across the state and down into the districts. And we also have the Outlook video, which is the Bureau's overview, and that's a really good summary of the expected conditions. But let's go a little bit closer into these charts, and we start off with a national overview. So the brown is lack of rainfall, and the blue is the potential of median or above median rainfall. Look across the top there, we can do 1 week, we can look at 2 week outlook, a 1 month outlook, and of course the 3 month or seasonal outlook. So there are different options there. You can look closer to home in a shorter time period, or you can move further out. Now the other aspect with this is that you can zoom in to New South Wales, or you can zoom in to the local region. And then again, you can still use, you can look at what the expectations are for the coming week, what the expectations are for the next 2 weeks, the next month, and then the next 3 month outlook. So it gives you a broad picture of what's going on through the atmosphere with regard to maximum temperature, minimum temperature, or what we're looking at here, believe it or not, is rainfall. So in July has certainly started off dry. Hopefully it's going to end off a little bit on the wetter side, and is the tropics. Southern annular mode is the Southern Ocean. Indian Ocean is the Indian Ocean dipole, and the Pacific Ocean is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. So let's go through them. Most of us have heard El Nino, Southern Oscillation Index, and La Nina. And basically it's related to the movement of warm water. When we have the warm waters sitting in the Western Pacific, so that's along our east coast, that typically leads to increased rainfall. When it sits over off the Eastern Pacific, so South America, we typically have cooler waters, so that means less rainfall. And then the Indian Ocean dipole is basically that same system, but it sits in the Indian Ocean. It's the movement of warm waters from off the coast of Africa through to the coast of Australia. Again, when we had the warm waters off the west coast, we're seeing above average, or typically would lead to above average rainfall. When we get the cooler waters, like we experienced last year, then we see less rainfall. Now the Madden Julian oscillation, this is a tropical system. It's basically a wave of instability that moves off the African continent. It traverses the equator, and as it moves through or moves towards us, it increases the instability through the atmosphere. Now what that does is it can lead to increased monsoonal activity, tropical cyclones, and some of that moisture can be brought down into New South Wales, and it can bring the potential of some widespread heavy rainfall. The southern annular mode is basically an interaction of winds between the upper atmosphere and the lower parts of the stratosphere. And basically what this does is it means that cold fronts will either be closer to the mainland, or they'll be further south, spring and summer potentially, and also generally increasing temperatures right across the region. So this is all incorporated into those climate outlooks. So let's have a closer look now at what the current climate outlooks are showing, because there have been some quite big changes over the recent months. So this is for the week the 13th to the 19th of July. Now everyone's been talking about this east coast low forming, and so we are starting to see the outlook models beginning to pick up the potential of that rainfall. Now at this stage they're suggesting that the low is going to be sitting up around the north coast, because that'll probably be the area to see the heaviest of the falls. But if we go through and look at 1 month, so again for August, the potential of above average rainfall. Now this is a combination of the warming waters in the Pacific Ocean and also warming waters in the Indian Ocean. So we are looking at the potential of increasing rainfall across the state. Because we're seeing it potentially a little bit higher through the inland areas, the input from the Indian Ocean dipole is likely to be slightly higher, but we are expecting to see the potential of that rainfall continue. Now, August is going to be the transition month. Well, July really should be. Once we see this pattern change into wetter conditions, we really should start to see it then kick in and persist across the region. Now this chart, so this is the current one that was issued yesterday. This is the 3-month outlook from August through to October. Now it's actually looking at the percentage chance of 150 millimetres falling over that 3-month period. So for much of the Hunter, that is a 50% or higher chance. So there is really quite a good potential of some worthwhile rainfall across the region over that 3-month period, again due to the Indian Ocean Dipole and also the ENSO, so the El Nino Southern Oscillation Index. Now, one of the key components to forecasting rainfall is forecast models. Now, I took these yesterday. These are 4 specific models. So the Bureau's Access G, the European model, the American model, and a Canadian model. Now, hopefully you can see quite clearly, this is the forecast for Monday with the low pressure system positioned between the south coast and the far north coast. So when we talk about variability or variation between the forecast models, so a little bit of uncertainty in the forecast, this tells you why, because they're all saying something slightly different. And it is still 4 days out. So what we will see with these forecast models is that as each day progresses and the event gets closer, these systems will start to form in a much smaller area. So we'll start to see one area really stand out as the region most likely to record the heaviest of the rainfall. So by around about Sunday, that should be quite noticeable. And we, at that point, probably start to see some warnings being issued for this event. But I suppose the key from this, there is a lot of variability at times between forecast models. So the uncertainty in the rain forecast also coincides with that. So there will be quite a bit of change in the amount of rainfall in the forecast over the next day or two until all these models begin to come together. So hopefully that gives you a really good, it is a very broad overview, but I really hope that one of the key things you perhaps take away from this is not only should we read the climate outlooks or read the forecast, but it really is worthwhile to get a little bit more understanding about the systems that are driving that rainfall or driving the hot temperatures, because they're going to repeat over time. So you start to build up a really good knowledge of how the weather systems work. And on top of that, you can then add into it your own innate knowledge of what's going on and what weather systems favour your area for perhaps rainfall or drier conditions. You can add that into the forecast information that comes to you from the Bureau of Meteorology. So hopefully you've learned a little bit from that. I have got my email address here. I am more than happy to answer questions if you want to send them through or provide you links. There will be links to the key climate pages in the digital copy that will be sent to you at the end of the forum. So you will get all that information, but no, more than happy to answer some questions. I won't get straight back to you, but I will eventually get back to you. But speaking of questions, I'll throw back to Albert and hopefully we can answer them.
Thanks, Graham. That was a very interesting topic. It's certainly shot to pieces the way I look at weather, especially that 100% sort of thing. And wow, taking a big risk putting your email up there, mate. I hope not too many people call you on the email system asking where the rain was from the promise on Friday night. We have got one question for you, Graham, that's come in. Is there any new improvements of technology for weather forecast predictions?
Yeah, I suppose the best way to answer that is the technology is improving all the time. When I first joined the Bureau of Meteorology, I mean, we really had satellites and balloon flights. So I used to do the balloon flights. So we'd put a foil target at the base of a balloon, release it through the atmosphere. From that, we could work out what the wind speed and direction was. That was done in around about 35 field stations across Australia at the same time. So that's how they got a profile of the atmosphere. One today, we also attached a small radio sonde that measured the pressure, the temperature, the humidity, as well as giving us the wind information. These days, satellites do all that, and there are thousands of satellites doing it. Ships, aircraft, they all provide weather information on takeoff, on landing, and the amount of information coming into the forecast models is just phenomenal, and that improves the forecasts. And also our understanding of climate patterns. We're talking at the moment about the ENSO, the Indian Ocean Dipole, the Madden Julian oscillation and the southern annular mode. And we're going to add more into that as time goes on, as there is more understanding how they interact with each other and how other systems interact. We know there are other systems, but at this stage it's just not 100% certain where they fit into the picture and who controls who. So there's so much more information coming. But we're living in a technological world, and it should really improve forecasting.
Yes, well, Graham, we've had a really positive comment here. It's apparently showering along the range in the Upper Hunter, showers coming in from north and west. So you've predicted it right on cue, mate. So already
good to hear.
Already being positive. While you're there, another question: why don't they change the way they display forecasts if so many people misread them?
Look, I suppose it's like any big corporation. They used to talk like isolated. I forget the terms now because they don't use them anymore. So they used to have different terminology. And I suppose the key thing is that in weather, everything has a meaning, which we've just shown with that forecast. Each of those figures, there is a meaning behind that. And that is all on the Bureau of Meteorology website. It's just a matter of finding it. And that's the key thing, I suppose. It comes down to being able to provide that information to everyone. I suppose a lot of the time we put stuff out there and we just expect that people have a certain understanding of it, but it's just never the case. So I suppose that's what I'm trying to do now is fill in people with what some stuff actually means, and that is one area of the forecast that is highly misunderstood.
Thanks, Graham. Matthew, we've got a couple of questions here for you. Does going to my doctor mean I have to take medication?
This is a bit of a common misconception that we find. A lot of the time people are often wary to go to their doctor because they just expect that their doctor's going to give them a box of happy pills and send them on their way. Now, that's not always the case. Medication does have a place when it comes to mental health, but just seeing a doctor and telling them about what's going on will not immediately mean that you have to start taking medication. Often doctors want to prevent people from going unnecessarily on medication, so they will often refer you on to another service who can help you manage that situation without the need for medication. If the doctor determines that medication might be necessary down the track, they'll also have that conversation with you. They'll make sure that you're informed about what you'll take and what the effect will be, and hopefully you can work together on a suitable plan to make sure that you generally pull through and can get to a place where you're back on track and back on your feet quickly.
Another one, Matthew. What can I do to help a friend that seems stressed?
I covered a number of tips that you might start to see in yourself, but there are also things that you might see in other people as well if they're stressed. You might notice that they're knocking back the opportunity to go downtown to the pub or come over for a barbie. These are things that will let us know that someone's okay. You might see that they're teary more often or angry more often than they normally would be. So when it comes to approaching a person or when you're worried about someone, having a conversation with them, there's a few things that you can do to make sure that conversation will go smoothly. First of all, make sure that you've got the right time and place to have a chat with them. That means a one-on-one setting where it's private and you're not going to be interrupted by anyone, and that you've also got the time to have a conversation in case you ask them what's going on and they decide to tell you the whole story. You need to make sure that you've got the time to sit down with them and let them speak to you about what's going on for them. The second thing that you can do is just honestly share with them what you've noticed about themselves, about the changes that you've seen, and ask them, is everything okay? Now, a person might take two options here. They might embrace the opportunity to have a conversation with you about what's going on, especially if things aren't okay, or they might tell you that everything's going all right and that you don't need to worry about them. Now, that can be okay in the first instance. If they tell you that everything's okay, you might have planted a seed with them. They might self-reflect and they might work on some ways to get themselves better. But if things haven't changed after a few weeks, it might be worth having that conversation again with them as well. Now, if they've taken the opportunity to have a chat with you about what's going on for them, the best thing that we can do is try to avoid any sort of judgment or any type of story sharing. What we want to do is allow that person to talk fully about what's happening for them. And that doesn't mean that you're sitting there thinking about situations that you want to share with them where you felt the same way. This is their space and their time. Let them have a chat. And lastly, the best thing that you can do is support them to get help. Let them know that they're okay and that they are supported, and that, again, offer the advice. There's places that they can go to for help in person or online or on the telephone. And if you're the right person, you can be happy to support them to go to a GP. You can help them make an appointment. You can sit with them in the waiting room. Or you could just simply provide them with a flyer of places or numbers that they can go to for help. So there are a few ways that you can help a person if you're worried about them. It's just about plucking up the courage to have that conversation with them.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. On a positive note, just a final question for you. Someone said, I love your decision worksheet as it keeps the process simple. Do you recommend keeping these things on hand so you can reflect later on what your drivers were at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. When we sat down to create this decision-making worksheet, simplicity really was the base of what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to make sure that the process was really easy to flow through and that it was something that a person could do again and again and again. Now, as I mentioned, you can jump on our website and print off however many of those sheets that you want and use them, keep them on hand to make decisions in the future. And that doesn't have to just be big decisions. It could be simple decisions as well. Eventually, what I'd expect is that all you'd need would be a blank bit of paper or, a bent up corner of a newspaper where you could sit down and jot a few words down around the decision-making process because you'd be that good at it. That's where we'd like everyone to aim for.
Thanks, Matthew. Graham, we've got a last question for you too. Probably a bit of a revision, but how accurate are the climate outlooks?
Okay, so it depends on the season and the location. Some years they're spot on. Other years there's quite big variations as to what was expected and what occurred. And I suppose some of the difficulty around that is you can have some years where you have an El Nino, but some areas get flooding, whereas you can have a La Nina and some areas will still be in drought. Perhaps a classic example of that was 2017, 2018 in summer. There was a La Nina technically, but it was only ocean based. The atmosphere never coupled with it. So we never really saw widespread rainfall. Some areas, particularly parts of Queensland, saw worthwhile rain, but other areas of the country saw very dry conditions. So each season will vary, and often some of the forecast, the outlook models don't necessarily pick up those small variations all that well, but the accuracy is actually on the models themselves. A lot of the time of the year, so as you're moving through the latter part of winter into spring, highly accurate through many areas of the country. But yeah, there are variations to that, and you also have to consider that you could have an outlook. I suppose a classic example is July. The expectations back from February were that July was probably going to record above average rainfall for much of the continent. Unfortunately, southern annular mode had some different ideas on that, so we've seen it kick in and really reduce the potential of rainfall with cold fronts across the southeast. The Indian Ocean Dipole, there was a bit of cyclone activity, so that cooled off a little bit. It's still expected to warm up again. So you can see these localised variations that have a really big impact in areas of the continent, even though they're thousands of kilometres away where that element occurs. But I would suggest that in the outlooks themselves, they do state exactly what the reliability and the accuracy of that forecast is. So it is worth checking that.
Okay, well, thanks, Graham. That closes our forum for today. I think we've had a really good session with two great speakers. Thank you for your time and for being freely available. But our forum doesn't finish today. It still continues. We've got another day on February the 24th of July with Sarah Giblin. We're talking about our soil probe network. And on Friday the 7th of August, our district vets will be talking about animal health topics that will assist you in decision making in this coming season. There's no need to register again, just keep an eye on our Facebook page, you'll find all the information there, and we'll also be sending out information about linking to the next sessions via email. We'll be also putting together a forum toolbox of the decision making tools, resources, and this will be put on a USB for you to pick up. Once again, thanks Matt and Graham for their time today, and see you all next time.